At my wife's father's will reading, my wife smirked at me and said, "My father left me all his money, so don't expect a dime." The lawyer quietly smiled and slid a folder across the table. "Actually, you might want to read this first." My wife's smirk vanished as she turned the first page. I never had high hopes for today. In fact, I expected nothing at all. Walter Dawson, my father-in-law, had never been particularly fond of me. From the moment I married his daughter, he made it clear that he saw me as an outsider, an intruder in a dynasty he had spent decades building. I was never one of them, never good enough in his eyes. And frankly, I had made my peace with that a long time ago. But my wife, Marissa, was a different story. She was the golden child, the cherished daughter, the one who could do no wrong. Spoiled since birth, she had always carried herself with the entitled confidence of someone who knew the world would bend to her every whim. She assumed. No, she knew. Her father's wealth would be hers the moment he was gone. And today, as we sat in the cold, dimly lit office of Grant & Fisher law firm, that smug certainty was written all over her face. The conference room smelled of polished wood and old paper. A long mahogany table stretched between us and the executor of the estate, Mr. Fisher, a man with silver-rimmed glasses and a perpetual look of indifference. He cleared his throat, shuffling the thick stack of documents in front of him. "Thank you for coming," he began, his voice smooth and rehearsed. "As you are aware, Mr. Dawson's estate is to be distributed according to his final wishes." I kept my expression neutral. I wasn't here to fight for scraps or entertain illusions of receiving anything. Marissa, however, sat forward, her manicured nails tapping rhythmically on the polished wood. The corner of her lips curled in an irritating smirk. She was dressed to impress, her designer dress hugging her frame, her jewelry sparkling under the overhead lights. She wore wealth like armor, but I knew the truth beneath the surface. The expensive clothes, the extravagant lifestyle, she couldn't afford any of it. Not on her salary. She was already spending money she didn't have. She leaned closer to me, her voice dripping with amusement. "You might as well tune out, sweetheart. Daddy left me everything." I said nothing. I wasn't here to argue. If she wanted to gloat, I'd let her. Mr. Fisher adjusted his glasses and continued reading. But something was off. Marissa's smug grin didn't fade. It grew. She wasn't even listening. She was waiting for me to react. And then, the bombshell dropped. The inheritance was transferred to Marissa 6 months prior to Mr. Dawson's passing, as per his request. I stiffened. The words took a second to register. Transferred, 6 months ago. I turned to Marissa. Instead of shock or even satisfaction, she laughed. "Oh, you're just now catching up?" she said, shaking her head. "Yeah, I already got the money and spent it." I just stared at her, my blood running ice cold. She wasn't gloating over inheriting wealth. She was mocking me because she had already burned through it. But Mr. Fisher wasn't fazed. If anything, he looked amused. That was the first thing that made me pause. Then, with a measured motion, he reached into his briefcase, pulled out a thick folder, and slid it across the table toward Marissa. "Actually," he said, far too calmly, "you might want to read this first." For the first time, Marissa's smirk vanished. Her perfectly manicured fingers hesitated before grabbing the folder. She flipped open the first page, and as she read, her confidence drained. Her eyes moved rapidly over the words, her expression shifting from arrogance to confusion, then to something that looked suspiciously like fear. I watched, fascinated. Her hands, always steady, trembled slightly as she turned the next page. "What is this?" she stammered. Mr. Fisher took his time responding, crossing his hands neatly on the table. "Your father wasn't a fool, Mrs. Dawson," he said smoothly. "He suspected you might try to access the estate prematurely, so he put certain safeguards in place." She looked up at him sharply. "What kind of safeguards?" Mr. Fisher adjusted his glasses. "A dummy inheritance. A false trust with specific conditions. The money you received 6 months ago." He tilted his head. "It wasn't the real inheritance." I felt my breath catch. Marissa sat frozen. "A test?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. I leaned forward. My interest suddenly piqued. "So, you're saying the money she spent was never hers to begin with?" Mr. Fisher nodded. Marissa's chair scraped loudly against the floor as she shot up. "You're lying!" she shrieked, her voice an octave higher than before. I spent it all. The vacations, the luxury apartment, the jewelry." Mr. Fisher remained unmoved. With practiced ease, he slid another document across the table. Marissa hesitated before looking at it, but when she did, her face drained of color. "What is this?" she asked again. But this time, there was no bravado, just pure, unfiltered panic. Mr. Fisher didn't blink. "A court order freezing all remaining assets linked to the stolen trust." For the first time in years, I saw a real fear in my wife's eyes. She reached for her phone with shaky hands. I need to. I need to call someone. But before she could press a button, Mr. Fisher spoke again. That won't help you. Marissa's breathing turned erratic. Her entire world was collapsing, and she knew it. She turned to me, eyes wide, desperate. You can't let them do this to me. I just smiled. You did it to yourself. Then she did something I never expected. She screamed. A full, rage-filled scream. Right there in the middle of the law office. It was a sound of defeat. Of a woman who had spent years believing she was untouchable, only to realize too late that she wasn't. Marissa had played herself. And I just sat back and enjoyed the show. The moment we left the law office, the weight of what had just happened began to settle in. But while I was still processing the sheer brilliance of Walter Dawson's final play, Marissa was spiraling. She stormed ahead of me, her heels clicking against the marble floor, phone gripped so tightly in her hand that I half expected the screen to shatter. I watched, almost amused, as she kept hitting redial, her perfectly manicured fingers trembling with each failed attempt. Pick up! Pick up! Pick up! She hissed under her breath, eyes darting back and forth like a trapped animal. Whoever she was calling wasn't answering. Not that I blamed them. Who would? I let out a slow breath, stuffing my hands into my pockets as I followed her out of the building. The air was crisp, sharp with the scent of rain, but the storm outside was nothing compared to the one brewing inside my wife. Correction, soon-to-be ex-wife. By the time we reached the parking lot, Marissa had given up on her phone and spun around to face me, her face twisted in something between fury and desperation. You knew, didn't you? She accused, her voice shaking. You knew my father was going to pull something like this. I raised an eyebrow. If I knew, do you think I'd be standing here so calmly? Her nostrils flared. You think this is funny? I tilted my head, pretending to consider it. A little. That was the moment she lost it. She lunged at me, hands curled into fists, slamming against my chest like an angry child throwing a tantrum. I lost everything, she screamed. Everything, you smug bastard. I caught her wrists mid-swing, holding them still. No, Marissa, I said evenly. You spent everything. She yanked her hands free, staggering back like I had slapped her. For the first time in years, she looked small, vulnerable. The layers of arrogance, entitlement, and designer clothes couldn't mask the undeniable truth. She had played a game. She wasn't smart enough to win, and she had lost. I can fix this, she whispered, more to herself than to me. Her eyes flickered with desperate determination. I just need to. She turned back to her phone, scrolling through her contacts with frantic movements. Her breath hitched when she found the name she was looking for. She hit call. I leaned against the car, crossing my arms over my chest. Let me guess. She held up a finger, silencing me. I smirked. Too late. Calling your lawyer? I continued, ignoring her glare. Or maybe one of your little friends who helped you burn through your fake inheritance? Her jaw clenched, but she didn't answer. Instead, she pressed the phone to her ear, listening, waiting. And then, her face fell. The call had gone straight to voicemail. I let out a slow, mocking whistle. Oof. That's rough. Marissa snapped her head up. Shut up. I grinned. You know what's funny? Just this morning, you sat in that office, smirking like you were untouchable. Like you had already won. And now? I gestured at her phone. You're alone, Marissa. No one's answering, are they? She swallowed hard because she knew I was right. The people she had surrounded herself with, the ones who had eagerly helped her spend every dime of what she thought was her inheritance, were nowhere to be found now that the money was gone. And that was when the panic truly started to set in. Her hands shook as she dialed another number, then another, and another. Every call went unanswered. Her breath grew uneven. This can't be happening, she muttered, fingers curling into her hair. This isn't real. I exhaled through my nose, watching her unravel. I should have felt bad. I didn't, because for years, I had watched her do this to others. I had watched her lie, manipulate, and discard people the second they were no longer useful to her. I had seen her humiliate waiters for bringing her food out a second too late. I had witnessed her mock struggling single mothers for not being able to afford designer clothes. And now? Now, she was the one no one wanted to be associated with. The irony was poetic. Marissa let out a shaky breath, turning her attention back to me. Her blue eyes were glossy with unshed tears. But I knew better. These weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of self-pity. She took a slow step forward. You wouldn't let me lose everything, she whispered. I blinked, then laughed. Actually laughed. Oh, sweetheart, I said, shaking my head. You lost me a long time ago. That was when she truly understood. She had been so sure I would always be there. That no matter how many times she belittled me, manipulated me, or used me, I would always be her backup plan. But I wasn't. Not anymore. I opened the car door and stepped inside. Marissa, still standing there in shock, moved to grab the handle. Wait, I locked the door. Her face contorted. You're leaving me here? I rolled down the window just enough to see her properly. Oh no, Marissa. You left yourself here. Her breath hitched. I don't have any money. I don't even have a way home. I tilted my head. Sounds like a you problem. And with that, I rolled the window back up, put the car into drive, and left her standing there alone for the first time in her entire life. As I drove away, a strange sense of peace washed over me. For years, I had been the punching bag, the doormat, the backup plan. But now I was free. And for the first time in a long, long time, I smiled. 2 weeks. That's how long it had been since I left Marissa standing in that parking lot. Her designer purse clutched against her chest like it held the last remnants of her dignity. 2 weeks of silence. No calls. No texts. No sudden appearances at my doorstep with fake tears and empty apologies. And honestly, I had expected worse. Marissa was a lot of things. Vain, selfish, entitled, but she wasn't stupid. She was calculating. So when she didn't show up right away, I knew she was waiting, plotting, figuring out her next move. But I had already made mine, and it was sitting right in front of me. The divorce papers. I stared at them, my fingers running over the thick, pristine pages. Clean, simple, final. This wasn't a heat-of-the-moment decision. It wasn't revenge or spite or bitterness. It was freedom. I took a deep breath, picked up the pen, and signed the first page. And right on cue, the doorbell rang. I closed my eyes, exhaling slowly. There she is. Marissa had always had an impeccable sense of timing. She knew how to drag out a moment, milk every last drop of control before making an entrance. But today, she was too late. I stood up, took my time walking to the door, and opened it. And there she was, Marissa Dawson, or soon-to-be Marissa Nobody, standing on my porch in the same designer coat she had worn the day her entire world imploded. Her makeup was perfect, her hair styled effortlessly. But I wasn't fooled. There was tension in her shoulders. A slight tremor in her lips. She was here for one reason and one reason only. She had nothing left. I leaned against the doorframe. Well, if it isn't my favorite soon-to-be ex-wife. Her jaw tightened. Let me in. I raised an eyebrow. What's the magic word? She inhaled sharply, nostrils flaring, but forced a tight-lipped smile. Please. I stepped aside, gesturing for her to enter. She hesitated, because for the first time in our entire relationship, she wasn't stepping into my house as my wife. She was stepping into my house as an outsider. I could see the realization hit her as she walked past me. She glanced around, her eyes darting to the spot where her designer furniture used to be. The expensive paintings, the ridiculous sculptures she had insisted on buying to impress her equally shallow friends, all gone. Because I had gotten rid of everything that reminded me of her. She turned to face me, arms crossed. We need to talk. I gestured to the couch. By all means. She didn't sit. Neither did I. She cleared her throat. I've had some time to think. I said nothing, waiting. She ran a hand through her hair. Things were set. Mistakes were made. I smirked. Buy things. You mean you laughing while telling me you had already spent all of your father's fake inheritance? Her lips pressed together. That's not what I meant. I nodded. Right? My mistake. Go on. She exhaled, frustration flickering in her eyes. Look, we've had our problems. I let out a sharp laugh. Oh, sweetheart, we didn't have problems. You were the problem. She flinched, but quickly masked it. I just think we shouldn't throw away everything we built together over a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding? That was rich. I folded my arms. Let me get this straight. You drained a fake inheritance, mocked me in a law office, lost everything. And now that you're broke, you want to work things out? She lifted her chin. I never said I was broke. I nodded toward the designer coat. She was clutching a little too tightly. Let me guess, that's the last expensive thing you own. Her fingers tightened around the fabric. Bingo. I sighed, rubbing my temples. You know what's funny? I would have done anything for you once. Her eyes softened as if she thought I was about to fold, but I wasn't. I met her gaze, my voice steady. But now, I wouldn't waste a single second on you. She inhaled sharply. You don't mean that. I laughed. Oh, I do. I walked past her, grabbed the divorce papers from the table, and slapped them against her chest. She grabbed them instinctively, eyes widening. What's this? She asked, her voice thin. I smirked. Your final exit ticket. She flipped through the pages, scanning them frantically, her breath quicker. Shallower. Her head snapped up. You're divorcing me? I shrugged. Figured I'd save you the trouble of plotting some ridiculous comeback plan. She swallowed hard. You already signed it? I nodded. She stared at me like she had never truly seen me before, like she had spent years underestimating me, assuming I would always be there, always willing to clean up her mess, but I wasn't her safety net anymore. She shook her head, taking a step back. "You don't have to do this." I tilted my head. "And what exactly is stopping me?" She was quiet for a long moment. Then, her last pathetic attempt. She sighed dramatically, letting the papers slip from her fingers onto the table. And when she looked up at me again, I saw it. The manipulation. The same old tactics. She took a slow step forward. Then another. Her lips parted slightly, her eyes softening, pleading. "You don't have to do this," she repeated, but softer this time. I watched her lift a hand, her fingers brushing against my chest. A deliberate touch, one I had fallen for 1,000 times before. I smiled. Then I took a step back. Her hand fell. Her face twisted. And that was the moment she knew she had lost. She let out a slow, shaky breath, her mask finally cracking. "So that's it." I nodded. She sucked in a breath, eyes flickering with something dark. "You'll regret this." I smiled wider. "No, Marissa. You will." She glared at me for a second longer, then grabbed the divorce papers, her hands trembling slightly. She stuffed them into her purse, turned sharply, and stormed toward the door. And as I watched her leave, I felt lighter, like I had just let go of a weight I didn't even realize I had been carrying. The second the door slammed behind her, I exhaled. Finally, free. For the first time in years, my house felt peaceful. No sharp insults disguised as jokes. No high-pitched voice screaming about something I had done wrong. No sound of designer heels clicking against the marble floors as Marissa paced back and forth, plotting her next move. Just silence. And I loved it. The divorce papers were out of my hands now. She had left, gripping them so tightly I half expected them to crumple into dust. Whether she signed them immediately or dragged out the process just to make my life difficult, I didn't care. Either way, it was over. Or so I thought. I had just poured myself a drink, settling onto the couch. When my phone rang, I frowned. It was late, and I wasn't in the mood for small talk. But when I saw the name on the screen, my stomach dropped. Margaret Dawson, Marissa's mother. For a split second, I debated ignoring it. The Dawsons had never been particularly warm toward me. And now that I was divorcing their daughter, I didn't see why that would change. But something felt off. Margaret never called me, not even when she and Walter were still together. She always let her husband handle things, preferring to keep her hands clean while he did the dirty work. So why now? I hesitated, then answered, "Hello." There was a pause. Then, "You bastard?" I blinked. "Excuse me, you really thought you could get away with this, didn't you?" Her voice trembled, not with sadness, but rage. "You think you can just divorce my daughter and walk away like nothing happened?" I pinched the bridge of my nose. "Here we go." "Margaret," I sighed. "I don't know what Marissa told you, but she's in the hospital, you piece of shit." My breath caught. "What?" A sharp inhale on the other end. "She overdosed." Silence. For a moment, I thought I had misheard her. She what?" "You heard me," Margaret snapped. "Took a bunch of pills. Doctor said if she hadn't been found when she wouldn't have made it." I exhaled sharply, running a hand down my face. Jesus. A million thoughts ran through my head. Was it real? Was this just another manipulation tactic? Or had she really? No. Even Marissa wouldn't go that far. Would she? I swallowed. "Where is she?" "Street. Vincent's," Margaret said tightly. "And you better get here. Now." Then she hung up. I sat there, gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. Marissa, in the hospital. I shouldn't care. She had destroyed everything between us. Used me, mocked me. Tried to manipulate me even as she lost everything. But despite it all, despite the years of damage, the lies, the betrayal, I couldn't shake the image of her lying in a hospital bed, alone, helpless. Was this my fault? I exhaled sharply. No. I wasn't the one who burned through millions of dollars. I wasn't the one who used people and tossed them aside like they were disposable. I wasn't the one who turned our marriage into a battlefield. But still, before I could talk myself out of it, I grabbed my keys and headed for the door. Street. Vincent's hospital was eerily quiet when I arrived. The kind of quiet that buzzed with tension, like a storm waiting to break. I approached the front desk, clearing my throat. Marissa Dawson. The nurse barely glanced up. Room 307. Visiting hours are almost over. I nodded, making my way down the hallway, my footsteps echoing in the sterile white corridor. When I reached her door, I hesitated. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't sure what I was walking into. Would she be grateful to see me? Would she be furious? Or would she be too broken to care? I took a breath, then pushed the door open. The room was dim, the only light coming from the beeping machines beside the bed. And there, lying pale and fragile against the white sheets, was Marissa. For a second, I barely recognized her.